Imagine the Super Bowl, but instead of cheerleaders, feathered heralds; instead of touchdowns, lance strikes; instead of ad breaks, all-out brawls. And the prize, not cash, but honor, romance, and a very loud "oh la la" from the stands. Medieval tournaments weren't just armored brawls. They were spectacles of power, politics, and performance, where weapons were props, and the real drama played out in hearts and courtrooms. The plot was as sharp as a lance tip. A peasant could become a hero, a duke, a disgrace, a king, the showrunner of a dynasty-making drama. Some entered for fame, some for marriage, some just to prove they had the heaviest shoulder in the county. Subscribe to our channel if you enjoy deep dives into stories where helmets shine and facts hit like a broadsword to the head. And tell us in the comments, where are you listening from and what time is it there? We're building a global medieval campfire. Today, we call Marvel actors and footballers stars. But between the 12th and 14th centuries, those sparkles in society belonged to a very different kind of man. A knight in armor, with a noble crest and a lance under his arm. A knight wasn't just a warrior, he was a social phenomenon, a military commander, landowner, fashion icon, influencer, and often a subject of collective adoration. His arrival at a tournament caused the same effect as a red carpet in Cannes. Crowds gathered, heralds shouted, ladies dropped handkerchiefs. The knight removed his helmet, and beneath the steel plate a dazzling smile or a black eye. Becoming a knight wasn't about buying a sword. One needed noble birth, training from the age of 7 as a page, then squire, mastery of everything from poetry to killing with a lance. This process took up to 14 years. Only then came the ceremonial dubbing, a prayer, a vigil in a chapel, ritual bathing, a symbolic blow to the neck. And you were a chevalier, knight, ritter. In real war, a knight might die anonymously, but a tournament was a chance to shine. It had a stage, an audience, competition, and a reward. Tournaments allowed knights to show off skills without full-scale risk, gain fame and renown, attract powerful patrons or potential spouses, and sometimes make real money, winning horses, armor, or even land. Think of the jousting arena as Instagram, and your likes were how many rivals you slammed into the dust. The earliest tournaments of the 11th to 12th centuries were nothing like the refined pageantry we imagine. These were giant free-for-alls with hundreds of armed men in open fields, closer to mass brawl than Olympic sport. The goal wasn't noble victory. It was to capture opponents, take their gear, and ransom them. Some knights even formed robbery teams, plundering the battlefield like bandits in chainmail. In 1179, a tournament in Limoges, France, ended with the city being burned by the participants. A horse dispute sparked the riot. Monarchs quickly realized tournaments weren't just games. They were tools of propaganda, diplomacy, and military readiness. Kings began organizing, regulating, and weaponizing them as state-sponsored events. Henry II of England issued the first official tournament permits. Louis IX of France approved a list of authorized combat forms. Philip IV banned tournaments before major political events, calling them too emotional. Some knights became professional tournament champions, like modern athletes. One such figure, Geoffroy de Charny, won over 40 tournaments and even wrote a manual on how to be a good knight. Yes, this was a legitimate career, and it could make you a legend. If medieval Europe were a theater, then France and England would be its stage, box office, and red carpet all in one. It was here that tournaments evolved from chaotic scuffles into full-scale continental spectacles. The roots of tournament culture trace back to Normandy in the 10th and 11th centuries. These northern warriors had a talent not only for conquest, but for highly performative violence. One of the earliest recorded tournaments happened in 1066, just before the Battle of Hastings, when William the Conqueror let his men rehearse and intimidate the English at the same time. But the true popularizer of tournaments was Henry II Plantagenet of England. In the 1160s, he officially sanctioned tournaments in 5 designated areas between the Thames and Gloucester. This was the first formal regulation of tournaments. The logic was simple. Knights need training, but not random brawling. And preferably, they should pay for the privilege. Tournaments became licensed events. The crown got revenue, knights got fame. The most legendary tournament enthusiast of all was Richard I, the Lionheart. He didn't just host tournaments, he competed in them, which was rare for royalty. In 1189, he appeared incognito at a tournament in Champagne, defeated several opponents, then revealed his identity. The reaction? Shock, awe, wild applause. Richard believed that tournaments forged the soul of a warrior. He also knew it was the perfect stage to showcase knightly valor before allies, vassals, noble ladies, and wandering poets. By the 12th and 13th centuries, the tournament had become a tool of international diplomacy. Alliances were tested, loyalty displayed, and knightly rankings established, all under the festive canopy of lances and armor. Kings used tournaments as rehearsals for war, as demonstrations of strength, and sometimes as veiled threats. In the 1240s, Philip III of France staged a massive tournament near the English border, coincidentally, in plain view of English spies. A subtle flex. The 1252 tournament in Salisbury brought things to a boil. It gathered some 300 knights from France, England, and Aquitaine. Rule disputes, a false start, and the accidental death of a count escalated into a full-blown diplomatic incident debated in royal courts. Tournaments were not just sport. They were geopolitical theater. By the 13th century, tournaments had become an industry. Armorers, heraldic artists, tailors specializing in tournament colors, poets composing verses for champions, all revolved around these events. In London, tournament agents arranged night participation, managed betting odds, coordinated meals and festivities. They even drew up contracts. And if you think modern sports agents are something new, think again. In the 1250s, knights were signing agreements for 3 tournaments with early withdrawal rights in case of injury. For all the troubadours' songs about honor, lances, and maidens in towers, the medieval tournament was still a dangerous, bloody, and often deadly affair. Behind the bravado, gleaming helmets and colorful capes, lay broken ribs, crushed skulls, and sudden widows. In the early age of tournaments, 11th, 13th centuries, no holds barred was the standard. Knights used real weapons, not blunted ones, and there was always temptation to accidentally injure a rival, especially if money, prestige, or revenge were at stake. Sometimes, A tournament was the perfect opportunity to eliminate an opponent under official cover. According to various estimates, 5 to 10% of knights suffered serious injuries during tournaments. In some cases, the number of fatalities rivaled battlefield losses. Essentially, tournaments became mini wars with an audience. Chronicles describe fields littered with the wounded, bodies, shattered lances, and torn-off helmets. The most infamous tournament death was Henry the Young King, son of Henry II and brother to Richard the Lionheart. In 1183, he participated in a string of tournaments in France. Though officially he died of dysentery, chroniclers noted that he refused to stop fighting despite his illness, exhausting himself physically and mentally. His death shocked Europe, not just because he was an heir, but because the tournament had robbed the crown before it could sit on his head. Worse still, his campaign had been funded with borrowed money. After his death, the crown inherited the debt. His tournaments were fatal and financially ruinous. In the 1240s, Knight Jean de Carouge killed an opponent during a tournament in Poitiers with a direct lance thrust through the shield and armor. He was sentenced to 7 years of pilgrimage to cleanse his soul. In another case, a knight who lost and refused to pay ransom was publicly stripped of his armor, title, and expelled from his order. A tournament could be a path to glory or a fast track to social suicide. To curb this romantic bloodbath, the 13th century saw the first attempts to standardize tournament rules, blunted weapons, blunts, compulsory heraldry, appointed judges, and designated areas for the injured. But rules couldn't prevent everything. In 1251 at Chartres, a knight fell from his horse and was crushed under his own armor. He couldn't be freed from the plates for 40 minutes. He died before the tournament ended. In the 14th century, the Pope even issued a bull condemning tournaments as sins of pride and vanity. But not even the Vatican could stop them, because glory, like a lance, was often more powerful than prudence. The medieval tournament was far more than a duel in the arena. It was a social and political platform where deals were struck, dynastic claims hinted, and entire fates rewritten. If today's politician appears on a televised debate, the medieval ruler sent his knight into the lists. A tournament was a display of power and influence. If a ruler could gather 200 knights for a grand spectacle, it meant he had wealth, noble support, and a flair for strategic theatrics. For monarchs, it was a chance to flex the realm, a muscular pageant for both vassals and rival kings. In the 1300s, English and French kings used tournaments to affirm dynastic legitimacy. Edward VI in 1306 hosted a massive tournament at Westminster to knight 200 young men, essentially creating a new knightly elite. Philip IV of France held a colossal tournament in Paris to assert royal strength after his father's death. Tournaments were also routes to marriage. Participation could open doors to prestigious unions. Women in noble stands watched the knights intently, and the victor in the lists might become the victor in love. One famous case, Guy de Lusignan, through tournament fame, married the widow of the king of Jerusalem and became king of Cyprus. Another knight from Burgundy lost a bout, but won the admiration of a countess by sparing his rival, and married her weeks later. Sometimes, Mercy was more seductive than triumph. Tournaments also served as loyalty litmus tests. In a feudal Europe where allegiance could shift like weather, tournaments offered rulers a preview of battlefield behavior. Who would attend? Whose side would they join? How would they conduct themselves? In 1328, at a tournament in Arras, French Duke Jean d'Artois publicly declined to fight for the king. 2 months later, he supported the English in the 100 Years' War. Even the format of a tournament could carry a coded message. Heraldic symbols, themes of competition, or subtle costume choices could signal political ambitions. In the 1350s, a knight claiming rights to a county entered a tournament bearing a crest with an inverted tower, a not-so-subtle jab at the sitting count's downfall. The tournament was a multifunctional political instrument. A lance could strike, yes, but it could also speak. And sometimes it spoke louder than a royal decree. If the battlefield was mud, sweat, and death, then the tournament was silk, fanfare, and controlled violence. It wasn't just a contest. It was a celebration, a carnival, and often a theatrical performance. Around it grew an entire culture, complete with etiquette, fashion, and symbolism. Tournaments were the top social events of the era. To appear without heraldry was like showing up at the Oscars without a dress. Every detail mattered. The color of your banner, the fabric of your cloak, the shape of your helmet, the engraving on your armor. Women, though not combatants, were central to the tournament's emotional theater. They bestowed handkerchiefs, gave tokens of favor, and sometimes selected the victor, based on how gracefully he carried his lance. A knight might enter the lists wearing his lady's colors, green, silver, black, or bearing her symbol, a heart, a falcon, a lily. One knight even appeared with his lady's shoe tied to his helmet, making sure everyone knew whose grace he carried into battle. By the 14th century, tournament fashion had become an art form. Embroidered cloaks bearing family arms, heraldic stockings, yes, for the pre-fight parade. Parade helmets topped with feathers, horns, or wings, useless in combat, but spectacular to behold. One Burgundian knight arrived in golden armor with blue bees. Another wore polished steel with mirrored plates, hoping to dazzle, literally, his opponent. Despite the violence, tournaments followed an unwritten code of honor. No finishing blows on a fallen man, no striking from behind, and help a defeated foe unfasten his helmet. Violations weren't judged in court. They were punished by social disgrace. Chronicles tell of one knight barred from future tournaments for breaking the code. His name was even struck from official histories. Sometimes, tournaments were elaborately staged with full storylines. Knights of the Moon versus Dragons of the North, duels between love and reason. Yes, literally. Even ladies' courts, where noble women judged who deserved victory. In Paris in the 1390s, a famous tournament featured knights portraying mythical heroes, Hector, Paris, Achilles, complete with costumes, invented backstories, and personalized theme songs. After the combat came the feast, 7-course meals, knights reciting poems, ladies presenting the prize of the heart. At a tournament in Valenciennes in 1342, the celebration lasted 3 days, with fireworks, dancing, and even a competition for the most noble beard. The tournament was a full theatrical production. The lance an actor, the horse a set piece, the crest a script, and love and glory the grand prizes. If tournaments were stages, then some became the Broadway premieres of chivalry, sung about in poems, recorded in chronicles, passed down as myths and legends. Some were grand, others brutal, and a few so absurd they seem ripped from satire. The Tournament of Tinchebray, 1106, a duel before the battle. Before the clash between Henry IV of England and his brother Robert, part of their armies, held a tournament, not as training, but as a display of courage before battle. This became known as the Dance Before the Storm. The next day, a real battle followed with over 3,000 dead. The Tournament of Champagne, 1180, a royal scale event held in France. This tournament gathered over 500 participants, including future leaders of the Third Crusade. A young Richard the Lionheart competed incognito and won. The 4-day program included Day 1, regional team battles, Day 2, individual jousts, Day 3, ceremonial parade of noble women, Day 4, banquet and prize giving. This became the model tournament for generations to follow. The Tournament of the Black Helm, 1449, France. A highly unusual affair. All knights competed in identical black armor, and the audience had no idea who was who. The purpose? To prove that glory should follow deeds, not names. One participant turned out to be a blacksmith's son, sneaking in under a false identity. His performance was so impressive, he was knighted on the spot. The Tournament at Eltham, 1306, a new generation of knighthood. Organized by Edward I, this was a ceremonial initiation of a new knightly class, including Prince Edward, future Edward II. 267 knights were dubbed, each receiving a crest, armor, and a horse. It was the largest mass knighting ceremony in English history. The Tournament at Ness, 1349, jousting amid plague. In Scotland, during the Black Death, a local lord held a tournament in honor of God and knightly endurance. Within a week, nearly all participants had died, including the organizer, a tragic reminder that chivalry couldn't outduel plague. The Tournament at Valenciennes, 1342, diplomatic jousting. This 5-day event gathered knights from France, England, Germany, and Italy, culminating in a symbolic battle between two Europes. For the first time, a tournament acted as a tool of diplomatic dialogue, even if peace remained elusive. These tournaments proved that chivalry was more than combat. It was a stage for gestures, messages, and ideals. Sometimes absurd, sometimes sublime, always a mirror of the age. If the Middle Ages were a symphony of heroism, then the 15th century was its final chord, the sound of lances drowned out by the thunder of cannons. Tournaments, once the epicenter of honor, began to lose ground. The main reason for their decline was gunpowder. As muskets could pierce armor, a knight in shining plate became an easy target. The tournament lost its purpose as preparation for real warfare. After battles like Crazier, 1346, and Agincourt, 1415, where English archers and gunners decimated heavily armored knights, European rulers shifted focus to infantry, firearms, and discipline, not poetic riders on horses. In the 14th and 15th centuries, tournaments still existed, but became more theater than trial. Knights dressed extravagantly, but fought half-heartedly. Ladies judged victories by elegance rather than impact. Weapons became almost decorative. More and more, the tournament resembled a masquerade. The rise of humanist thinking during the Renaissance also challenged the value of chivalric violence. Intellectuals wrote treatises criticizing tournaments as vain, dangerous nostalgia. In 1494, Italian philosopher Pico della Mirandola referred to tournaments in his Oration on the Dignity of Man as emotional games leading to pride and blindness. The final blow came with the death of King Henry II of France in 1559. During a tournament in Paris, a lance pierced his helmet and struck his eye. He died days later in agony. Europe was stunned. If even a monarch helmeted and surrounded by guards at a state event wasn't safe, then the game had gone too far. Tournaments were banned in many realms. France did so immediately. Yet tournaments didn't vanish completely. They evolved into courtly performances, festival entertainment, or parts of coronations and weddings. Some traditions persisted in Swiss and Spanish reenactments. But this was no longer a matter of life and death, just nostalgia with good tailoring. When the lance became a prop and the horse a set piece, the tournament lost its soul. The knight dismounted and handed the stage to new heroes of a changing age. The knight may have disappeared from the battlefield, but not from the imagination. Though tournaments vanished from Europe's strategic life, they remain embedded in the cultural DNA of the West as symbol, archetype, and style. Even centuries later, their influence echoes through fantasy, ceremony, and sport. In books and film without the tournament, there would be no Game of Thrones, no Lord of the Rings, no Ridley Scott epics. A knight in a swirling cloak, a barded horse, a lady watching from the gallery. This is the visual code of heroism. Even modern films like A Knight's Tale with Heath Ledger recreate the tournament, this time with rock music, but the same narrative spine: trial, glory, combat, and courtly love. In sports soccer, tennis, fencing, many competitions inherited tournament rhetoric: a tournament bracket, a duel on the field, a worthy rival. The modern Olympics revived the spirit of antiquity, but much of the format came from the Middle Ages. In historical reenactments, in the 21st century, from Poland to Australia, authentic knight tournaments are staged, in full armor, with real lances, under strict rules. These aren't shows, they're recognized sports disciplines. The tournament has returned as a battlefield, if now with a referee. In language and thought, we still say, to fight for someone, a battle for the heart, enter the fray, or a knight of honor. These phrases are footprints of the tournament in everyday thought. We romanticize struggle when logic alone can't win the day. In futures we imagine, even in dystopias and sci-fi worlds, the tournament endures as a structure of trial. The Hunger Games, Dune, Star Wars, they all feature duels, spectators, ceremonies, judgment. It's an ancient format of human drama, because no matter how advanced our tech becomes, we still crave the moment when one champion faces another, publicly, ritualistically, dramatically. The medieval tournament died, but it never disappeared. It transformed into an idea that still lives in us. When we fight for a cause, when we stand for the underdog, when we tremble before the moment, even if our lance is now a microphone and our shield is just a word. Thank you for joining us on this thrilling journey through the centuries of tournaments, lances, and knightly honor. We hope you felt the dust of the lists, the blare of the fanfare, and the flutter in the heart of a watching lady. Stay tuned for our upcoming stories. More drama, irony, and historical revelations await. And in the meantime, keep your lance of thought sharp and your shield of skepticism shining. Let us know in the comments where in the world you're listening from and which part of the story struck you the most. See you in the next episode.